Hello, everyone. Today we're continuing our study of Animal Farm. And as usual, as I did all those streams before, we start with a quick recap of what happened in the previous chapter. Now, the previous chapter was chapter 6, and a lot of things happened during this chapter. The conditions of life on farm are beginning to harshen up. Uh, they, the animals, were working together to actually bring the mill closer to the completion, the construction of the mill, of course, and lots of other things have happened. Lots of character development for many of characters like Boxer and Napoleon himself. Uh, Animal Farm started to work with people to trade, and actually, the first ever occasion of forgery happened on Animal Farm when someone, probably on the order of acting upon the order of Napoleon, changed one of the 7 commandments that had been inscribed on the barn wall. But this was just a quick list of events that happened during the chapter 6. Of course, I didn't mention that the mill was demolished and Napoleon blamed his old rival Snowball for this catastrophe. But it's not the events that I am extremely interested into. I am interested in some conclusions, some wise thoughts that we might take from the events. And at this point, there are I don't have any doubts that with diligent enough reading of the book, you would be able to find a lot of wise thoughts to extract from every chapter. But in terms of practical application of it, at this point, the situation seems quite honestly hopeless, absolutely hopeless. Napoleon starts to change rules in a sneaky manner. He uses arbitrarity of 7 commandments, meaning that it's not quite obvious why some parts of major speech went to the commandments, some of them didn't make it there. And even though Major is the architect of the animals' rebellion, actually, some of his words were considered not necessary to follow, right? And nothing wrong with this, but it seems quite strange if all this situation were to be applied to people and not to animals. I would I would say that a lot of explaining has to be done in order to this be resolved on part of Napoleon, of course. So by arbitrarity, I will give an example. They started to trade with people, even though through the first chapter, Major was very much persuasive about not being anything like humans, and especially not to trade with them. And also, pigs decided to move into house, and this wasn't forbidden by commandments. And they decided to sleep in beds, which was forbidden by commandments. And this is why the commandments were changed. This one, I think it was the first commandment, was forged. So here goes the unalterability of those commandments. And some animals actually grasped that they are not honest. Their leaders are not honest about the situation. Pigs, actually, some of the pigs uh, that probably didn't go for the full collusion of pigs, they noticed and they raised very shy voices of what happens, what happened and what will happen. But they were more or less silenced. Some other animals were able to, at least they remembered something that was different from what happens now, from what is happening now, and they were willing to go and check with the commandments, which of course was forged just in time, and then explained after that with the propaganda. And the situation is not bad because of the changes of the commandments, because, well, most of the things ought to be perfected and changed, but rather with how sneakily these changes were made. And the post factum explanations were very much just to shut down all the uh, possible members of opposition. So I'm not sure actually what can you do at this point, because this is, even though it's been just a while, just a little bit of time has passed from the demolishment of the human rule, and even less time has passed since the abolition of triumvirate, or maybe the best way to describe it was usurpation, when Napoleon usurped the leadership of the animal farm to himself and abolished the triumvirate. Well, even though very little time has passed from either of those two points in the history of the farm, the situation already seems like it can be changed. With all honesty, you can apply some human standards and say that they ought to waken up just as they did when they overthrew the leadership of people on the farm. But I don't really think that this is a possibility at this point, because they were the situation was very much laid out for all animals by the smartest animals on the farm, by pigs. And right now, pigs are those who are kind of imposing their will on other animals. And the situation is not as dire as if all those who have brains decided to conspire against all others, against the sheeple, as it's would be said in case of people. But those of pigs who would not betray the principles just as easily, they have absolutely zero power, right? And I can't help but think that the moments when things could be changed were in the past, actually. And it all started with some of silent acceptance of rules, arbitrary rules that were created by pigs, by Napoleon and Snowball. And I can't help but again think about what could have changed the situation. And I would say that the only thing that could have make enough changes here is to be extremely attentive to the anything that happens on the farm, to check it with some rules that they have established, be it written rules or just spoken ones. And you need to be extremely precise about all interpretation of those rules, about all possible alterations of those rules. And if something happens and you don't understand exactly what happened or some details about it, this seems as one of the easiest passes to hold the government in check, to be constantly in a dialogue with the government officials, representatives, and to actually demand a very thorough explanation of what is happening here. Maybe that would mean that some of the populace would be in disfavor of government, but if we are talking about tyrannical government, I guess well, everybody would be on a bad side of it eventually, or suffer for silence. And in terms of more or less democratically oriented government, that wouldn't matter that much, or even that would give some authority. And this didn't happen, right? When pigs took milk and apples for themselves, nobody asked for what exactly the amount of those products do you need actually to bring up the numbers. For how long is this going to happen? Are there actually some exemptions from these rules? Well, maybe I'm just applying too much of human logic to the situation that happens on Animal Farm, but I still think that this is the perfect or one of the best allegories to the human society and something that could happen and actually happens somewhere in the world or maybe in lots of places at once. And yes, so those are my thoughts about that. One more thought that I have about the current situation here is that some of animals who are not pigs but have quite an authority, for example, boxers, uh, well, he probably would be able to actually ask Napoleon about some of his decisions, some of his judgments. But unfortunately, he was unable of intellectual work, and one of his mottos is Napoleon is always right. So it doesn't look like something would change, uh, and even if it would change, the change wouldn't come from the boxer. So at this on this sad note, I would go further to read the Animal Farm, and we have chapter 7. It was a bitter winter. The stormy weather was followed by sleet and snow, and then by a hard frost which did not break till well into February. The animals carried on as best as they could with the rebuilding of the windmill, well knowing that the outside world was watching them and that the envious human beings would rejoice and triumph if the mill were not finished on time. Out of spite, the human beings pretended not to believe that it was Snowball who had destroyed the windmill. They said it had fallen down because the walls were too thin. The animals knew that this was not the case. Still, it had been decided to build the walls 3 feet thick, this time instead of 18 inches as before, which meant collecting much larger quantities of stone. For a long time, the quarry was full of snowdrifts, and nothing could be done. Some progress was made in the dry, frosty weather that followed, but it was cruel work, and the animals could not feel so hopeful about it as they had felt before. They were always cold and usually hungry as well. Only Boxer and Clover never lost heart. Squealer made excellent speeches of the joy of service and the dignity of labor, but the other animals found more inspiration in Boxer's strength and his never failing cry of "I will work harder." In January, food fell short. The corn rations were drastically reduced, and it was announced that an extra potato ration would be issued to make up for it. Then it was discovered that the greater part of the potato crop had been frosted in the clamps, which had not been covered thickly enough. The potatoes had become soft and discolored, and only a few were edible. For days at a time, the animals had nothing to eat but chaff and mangles. Starvation seemed to stare them in the face. It was vitally necessary to conceal the fact from the outside world. Emboldened by the collapse of the windmill, the human beings were inventing fresh lies about Animal Farm. Once again, it was being put about that all the animals were dying of famine and disease, and that they were continually fighting among themselves and had resorted to cannibalism and infanticide. infanticide. Napoleon was well aware of the bad results that might follow if the real facts of the food situation were known, and he decided to make use of Mr. Whymper to spread a contrary impression. Hitherto, the animals had had little or no contact with Whymper on his weekly visits. Now, however, a few selected animals, mostly sheep, were instructed to remark casually in his hearing that rations had been increased. In addition, Napoleon ordered the almost empty bins in the store shed to be filled nearly to the brim with sand, which was then covered up with what remained of the grain and meal. On some suitable pretext, Whymper was led through the store shed and allowed to catch a glimpse of the bins. He was deceived and continued to report to the outside world that there was no food shortage on Animal Farm. Nevertheless, toward the end of January, it became obvious that it would be necessary to procure some more grain from somewhere. In these days, Napoleon rarely appeared in public, but spent all of his time in the farmhouse, which was guarded at each door by fierce-looking dogs. And he did emerge. It was a ceremonial manner, with an escort of 6 dogs, who closely surrounded him and growled if anyone came too near. Frequently, he did not even appear on Sunday mornings, but issued his order all through one of the other pigs, usually Squealer. On Sunday morning, Squealer announced that the hens, who had just come to lay again, must surrender their eggs. Napoleon had accepted, through Whymper, a contract for 400 eggs a week. The price of this would pay for enough grain and meal to keep the farm going till summer came on and conditions were easier. When the hens heard this, they raised a terrible outcry. They had been warned earlier that this sacrifice might be necessary, but had not believed that it would really happen. They were just getting their clutches ready for the spring sitting, and they protested that to take the eggs away now was murder. For the first time since the expulsion of Jones, there was something resembling a rebellion. Led by 3 young black Minorca pullets, the hens made a determined effort to thwart Napoleon's wishes. Their method was to fly up to the rafters and there lay their eggs, which smashed to pieces on the floor. Napoleon acted swiftly and ruthlessly. He ordered the hens' rations to be stopped and decreed that any animal giving so much of a grain of corn to a hen would be punished by death. On which law, I would ask? The dogs saw to it that these orders were carried out. For 5 days the hens held out, then they capitulated and went back to their nesting boxes. 9 hens had died in the meantime. Their bodies were buried in an orchard, and it was given out that they had died of coccidiosis. Whymper heard nothing of this affair, and the eggs were duly delivered, a grocer's van driving up to the farm once a week to take them away. All this while no more had been seen of Snowball. He was rumored to be hiding on one of the neighboring farms, either Foxwood or Pinchfield. Napoleon was by this time on slightly better terms with the other farmers than before. It happened that there was in the yard a pile of timber which had been stacked there 10 years earlier, when a beach spiny was cleared. It was well seasoned, and Wimper has advised Napoleon to sell it. Both Mr. Picklington and Mr. Frederick were anxious to buy it. Napoleon was hesitating between the two, unable to make up his mind. It was noticed that whenever he seemed on the point of coming to an agreement with Mr. Frederick, Snowball was declared to be in hiding at Foxwood, while when he inclined toward Pinkleton, Snowball was said to be at Pinchfield. Suddenly, early in the spring, an alarming thing was discovered. Snowball was secretly frequenting the farm by night. The animals were so disturbed that they could hardly sleep in their stalls. Every night, it was said, he came creeping in under cover of darkness and performed all kinds of mischief. He stole the corn, he upset the milk pails, he broke the eggs, he trampled the seed beets, he gnawed the bark of the fruit trees. Whenever anything went wrong, it became usual to attribute it to Snowball. If a window was broken or a drain was blocked up, someone was certain to say that Snowball had come in the night and done it. And when the key of the store shed was lost, the whole farm was convinced that Snowball had thrown it down the well. Curiously enough, they went on believing this even after the mislaid key was found under a sack of meal. The cows declared unanimously that Snowball crept into their stalls and milked them in their sleep. The rats, which had been troublesome that winter, were also said to be in league with Snowball. Napoleon decreed that there should be a full investigation into Snowball's activities. With his dogs in attendance, he set out and made a careful tour of inspection of the farm buildings, the other animals following at a respectful distance. At every few steps, Napoleon stopped and snuffed the ground for traces of Snowball's footstep, which he said he could detect by the smell. He snuffed in every corner, in the barn, in the cowshed, in the henhouse, in the vegetable garden, and found traces of Snowball almost everywhere. He would put his nose to the ground, give several deep sniffs, and exclaim in a terrible voice, "Snowball, he has been here, I can smell him distinctly." And at the word Snowball, all the dogs let out blood-curdling growls and showed their side teeth. The animals were thoroughly frightened. It seemed to them as though Snowball were some kind of invisible influence, pervading the air about them and menacing them with all kinds of dangers. In the evening, Squealer called them together and, with an alarmed expression on his face, told them that he had some serious news to report. Well, Snowball has become uh, some sort of a supernatural character in the mouth of Napoleon and his lackeys, and everything that went wrong on the farm was attributed to Snowball, just to not make Napoleon and his way of ruling, his dictatorship, to be seen responsible for any losses on the farm. I Well, we all know that those things happen with tyrannical governments. So let's continue. "Comrades," cried Squealer, making little nervous skips, "a most terrible thing has been discovered. Snowball has sold himself to Frederick on Pinchfield Farm, who is even now plotting to attack us and take our farm away from us. Snowball is to act as his guide when the attack begins. But there is worse than that. We had thought that Snowball's rebellion was caused simply by his vanity and ambition. But we were wrong, comrades. Did you know what the real reason was? Snowball was in league with Jones from the very start. He was John's secret agent all the time. It has all been proved by documents which he left behind him and which we have only just discovered. To my mind, this explains a great deal, comrades. Did we not see for ourselves how he attempted, fortunately without success, to get us defeated and destroyed at the Battle of the Cowshed, which is exactly the opposite of what happened? The animals were stupefied. This was a wickedness far outgoing Snowball's destruction of the windmill, but it was some minutes before they could fully take it in. They all remembered, or though they remembered, or thought they remembered, how they had seen Snowball charging ahead of them at the Battle of the Cowshed, how he had rallied and encouraged them at every turn, and how he had not paused for an instant even when the pellets from John's gun had wounded his back. At first, it was a little difficult to see how this fitted in with his being on John's side. Even Boxer, who seldom asked questions, was puzzled. He lay down, tucked his fore hoofs beneath him, shut his eyes, and with a hard effort managed to formulate his thoughts. I do not believe that, he said. Snowball fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowshed. I saw him myself. Did we not give him Animal Hero First Class immediately afterwards? That was our mistake, comrade. For we now know, it is all written down in the secret documents that we have found, that in reality he was trying to lure us to our doom. But he was wounded, said Boxer. We all saw him running with blood. This was a part of the arrangement, cried Squealer. John's shot only grazed him. I could show you this in my own writing, if you were able to read it. The plot was for Snowball, at the critical moment, to give the signal for flight and leave the field to the enemy. And he very nearly succeeded. I will even say, comrades, he would have succeeded if it had not been for our heroic leader, Comrade Napoleon. Do you not remember how, just at the moment when Jones and his men had got inside the yard, Snowball suddenly turned and fled, and many animals followed him? And do you not remember, too, that it was just at the moment when panic was spreading and all seemed lost that Comrade Napoleon sprang forward with a cry of death to humanity and sunk his teeth in John's leg? Surely you remember that, comrades, exclaimed Squealer, frisking from side to side. Now, when Squealer described the scene so graphically, it seemed to the animals that they did remember it. At any rate, they remembered that at the critical moment of the battle, Snowball had turned to flee. But Boxer was still a little uneasy. I do not believe that Snowball was a traitor at the beginning, he said finally. What he has done since is different, but I believe that at the Battle of Cowshed he was a good comrade. Our leader, Comrade Napoleon, announced Squealer, speaking very slowly and firmly, has stated categorically, comrade, that Snowball was John's agent from the very beginning, yes, and from long before the rebellion was ever thought of. Ah, that's different, said Boxer. If Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right. So the Boxer was betrayed by his own loyalty to Napoleon. And I actually still have high hopes for Boxer. And I'm very proud that Boxer actually did say something about this. Because, well, Boxer was also in the middle of the battle of the Cowshed. Well, remember that he knocked out one of the men. I do not remember who it was. Actually, he knocked out, but whatever. And he was near the Snowball, but again, the situation here is that Boxer is not the thinker. Unfortunately, the animals here, even though the all of them are very human-like, they do not possess equally distributed mental strength and intellect. So, well, I still remember that Boxer was very hard learner. He had very hard time learning the alphabet and how to read and write, and he was more or less just the workforce. And it's not fair, but it is what it is. And I'm glad that he voiced his thoughts, he voiced his concerns, and several times he said, I do not believe it. But he adopted a very, very dangerous maxim that Napoleon is always right. And this put an end to his objections. That is the true spirit, comrade, cried Squealer, but it was noticed that he cast a very ugly look at Boxer with his little twinkling eyes. He turned to go, then paused and added impressively, I warn every animal on this farm to keep his eyes very wide open, for we have reasons to think that some of Snowball's secret agents are lurking amongst us at this moment. Of course, of course. I don't I can only guess what would happen next, but since Squealer is now very close to the leader, he is the main propaganda worker. He actually has some political, if we may say so, will of his own. And even though I doubt very much that he would ever try to do something against the Napoleon, sorry, I I think that the fact that he had to put some effort to persuade Boxer, he is upset with it. And the fact that Boxer was not willing to believe Squealer and only gave up after the name of Napoleon was brought into the conversation. I think Squealer was able to grasp what it means, that he has zero authority over Boxer, and Boxer only loyal more or less to Napoleon. Well, not more or less, but actually fully loyal to him, uh, even though it is his own loss. Well, he noticed it, and I think it would be reasonable to suspect that Squealer going to plot against Boxer. And, well, this is exactly why he mentioned those secret Snowball's agents. 4 days later... Sorry. So, 4 days later, in the late afternoon, Napoleon ordered all the animals to assemble in the yard. When they were all gathered together, Napoleon emerged from the farmhouse wearing both his medals, for he had recently awarded himself Animal Hero First Class and Animal Hero Second Class, with his 9 huge dogs frisking around him and uttering growls that sent shivers down all the animals' spines. They all cowered silently in their places, seeming to know in advance that some terrible thing was about to happen. Napoleon stood sternly surveying his audience. Then he uttered in a high-pitched whimper. Immediately the dogs bounded forward, seized 4 of the pigs by the ear, and dragged them, squealing in the pain and terror, to Napoleon's feet. The pigs' ears were bleeding, the dogs had tasted blood, and for a few moments they appeared to go quite mad. To the amazement of everybody, 3 of them flung themselves upon Boxer. Boxer saw them coming and put out his great hoof, caught a dog in mid-air, and pinned them to the ground. Him to the ground. The dog shrieked for mercy, and the other 2 fled with their tails between their legs. Boxer looked at Napoleon to know whether he should crush the dog to death or let it go. Napoleon appeared to change countenance and sharply ordered Boxer to let the dog go, whereat Boxer lifted his hoof and the dog slunk away, bruised and howling. What's happening here? So I assume the four pigs are those pigs who were not willing to just take everything that Napoleon said and actually raised some concerns twice in the past. The first time, if I'm not mistaken, was when Napoleon decided to abolish the Sunday meetings, at which they would vote for what is necessary to do next week. And then when the trade has begun with people, so yeah, it was only a matter of time when this would happen, apparently. Uh, but to actually attack Boxer, this seems that the governance of Animal Farm is rotten to the core because Boxer is the main force behind all the production on the farm. Boxer was a Boxer is a hero here, even though he's played as a fool. He didn't let himself to be brought down by dogs and showed that well actually he can at least take 3 dogs out of 9 dogs. So all other animals have to do with other 6 of them. But I'm getting ahead of the time. We're not in that situation here, and I doubt we will ever be there. Presently, the tumult died down. The four pigs waited, trembling, with guilt written on every line of their countenance. Napoleon now called upon them to confess their crimes. They were the same four pigs as had protested when Napoleon abolished the Sunday meetings. Without any further prompting, they confessed that they had been secretly in touch with Snowball ever since his expulsion, that they had collaborated with him in destroying the windmill, and that they had entered into an agreement with him to hand over Animal Farm to Mr. Frederick. They added that Snowball had privately admitted to them that he had been John's secret agent for years past. When they had finished their confession, the dogs promptly tore their throats out, and in a terrible voice Napoleon demanded whether any other animals has anything to confess. What is going on here? Those pigs actually confessed and then were killed. I assume that it could happen like they were brought to Napoleon. Napoleon demanded that they would publicly confess in all the things that they just confessed, and then he would expel them or imprison them or whatever, but to kill them. Or maybe he did exactly that and promised them a comfortable imprisonment inside the house, but on the spot he decided that enough with the lies and just ordered to kill them. This is hard. I don't understand. Well, I definitely do not believe that they actually had been in contact with Snowball, because well, we all know that this is all of this is nonsense. Or well, this is the most reasonable theory that I got about what happened now. The other one is that they all knew what Napoleon wanted to hear from them, and they were too scared to actually think it through. and they all just said what was expected of them, or maybe even Napoleon helped them a little bit as they were led by him in their confession. So this is awful. The thing is awful. The three hands who had been the ringleaders in the attempted rebellion over the axe now came forward and stated that Snowball had appeared to them in a dream and incited them to disobey Napoleon's orders. They too were slaughtered. Then a goose came forward and confessed to having secreted 6 ears of corn during the last year of harvest and eaten them in the night. Then a sheep confessed to having urinated in the drinking pool, urged to do this, so she said, by Snowball, and two other sheep confessed to having murdered an old ram, an especially devoted follower of Napoleon, by chasing him round and round a bonfire when he was suffering from a cough. They were all slain on the spot. What is going on? Why they are confessing in those things? I can't believe that the pigs could have been lied to. They were promised one thing, but after they served their purpose, they were killed. But all other animals, well, of course, they were not great thinkers. This is already was established, but I don't believe that they do not understand the concept of violent death and lies, which exactly what happened now. Why all of them confessed things just to get slaughtered later? I suspect foul play. I suspect that Napoleon. I suspect that those animals, being somewhat leaders for their kind, sheeps, hens, goose. Who else? I think they were somewhat like a. If I may draw some analogies with people, I would say that they were representatives of a certain uh, group of population, and they were offered a tough choice: confess to the sins and be slain, or don't do this, and instead the whole group would be slain. And they they decided to sacrifice themselves. This is awful stuff. I can't believe that this is what happens here, because this is this is very believable, and I absolutely appalled by all of this. And so the tale of confessions and executions went on until there was a pile of corpses lying before Napoleon's feet, and the air was heavy with the smell of blood, which had been unknown there since the expulsion of John's. When it was all over, the remaining animals, except for the pigs and dogs, crept away in a body. They were shaken and miserable. They did not know which was more shocking: the treachery of the animals who had licked themselves with Snowball, or the cruel retribution that they had just witnessed. In the old days, there had often been scenes of bloodshed equally terrible, but it seems to all of them that it was far worse now that it was happened among themselves. Since Jones had left the farm, until today no animal had killed another animal. Not even a rat had been killed. They had made their way on to the little knoll where the half-finished windmill stood, and with one accord they all lay down as though huddling together for warmth. Clover, Muriel, Benjamin, the cows, the sheep, and the whole flock of geese and hens. Everyone, indeed, except the cat, who had suddenly disappeared just before Napoleon ordered the animals to assemble. For some time nobody spoke. Only Boxer remained on his feet. He fidgeted to and fro, swished his long black tail against his side, and occasionally uttered a little whine of surprise. Finally he said, I do not understand it. I would not have believed that such things could happen on our farm. It must be due to some faults in ourselves. The solution, as I see it, is to work harder. From now onwards, I shall get up a full hour earlier in the mornings. Well, he had a very interesting character development here, and he got the things halfway right. Unfortunately, I don't think that they. Well, I'm actually touched by the role of Boxer during this chapter. He's an absolutely giga chat that I I perceived him initially, and even better, he has a very, even though he is illiterate, he actually is he is the closest to be an independent thinker than any other animal on the farm, and he is maybe due to his strengths and that he actually can handle himself. He is willing to voice his own thoughts, and this is beautiful. Fortunately, he didn't think the situation through fully, and he resolved back to his previously known motto of "I will work harder." But the fact that he is willing to accept that some faults are within the animals is this is this is both inspiring and troubling, actually, because the fault is, even though part of the fault maybe partly is on animals, but they were held hostage to the ideology they were all led into and to which they were trained to follow. And also, they are not organized groups, while all the guards, the dog guard, is very well organized and is willing to kill. And it's not a joke. I'm very much hesitant to say that there is a fault in themselves as if they are fully responsible for what happens, because there is a certain number of animals who are responsible for that, and actually Snowball is partly responsible for that because he was working is duumvirate with Napoleon, and he was blind to the fact how Napoleon carried himself, how he disrespected his works, his ideas, that he, Napoleon, was sometimes in a position to Snowball just because he wanted to be in a position, he wanted to have this tension, he wanted to create a sort of antagonism between them. Sorry. Uh, so my point is, even though I'm not sure actually, this is a very tough place, but mostly I believe that the guilty are those who collided with Napoleon's dictatorship. So obviously Napoleon himself and those who went along with him willingly. So I wouldn't even put so much of responsibility on the dogs, even though they did all the the what's it called, dirty work and all the killing. They were raised in absolute loyalty to Napoleon, and this is the nature of them. So Napoleon, Squealer, Minimus, those who collided with them out of their own volition. Yeah, we'll have to get back to that because I this is extremely heavy chapter. I did not believe that it would took such an event, such turn of events so quickly because well, yeah, for the past couple of chapters the situation went from uh, more or less utopian, all animals work together and live happily and friendly and work for brighter future. It went to a bit worse, and now we just it all crashed down to this. This is this is not good. Okay. And he moved off at his lumbering trot and made for the quarry. Having got there, he collected two successive loads of stone and dragged them down to the windmill before retiring for the night. The animals huddled about Clover, not speaking. The knoll where they were lying gave them a wide prospect across the countryside. Most of Animal Farm was within their view. The long pasture stretching down to the main road, the hayfield, the spinney, the drinking pool, the plough fields, where the young wheat was thick and green, and the red roofs of the farm building with the smoke curling from the chimneys. It was a clear spring evening. The grass and the bursting hedges were gilded by the level rays of the sun. Never had the farm, and with this a kind of surprise, they remembered that it was their own farm. Every inch of it their own property appeared to the animals so desirable a place. As Clover looked down the hillside, her eyes filled with tears. If she could have spoken her thoughts, it would have been to say that this was not what they had aimed at when they had set themselves years ago to work for the overthrow of the human race. These scenes of terror and slaughter were not what they had looked forward to on that night when old Major first steered them to rebellion. If she herself had had any picture of the future, it had been a society of animals set free from hunger and the whip, all equal, each working according to his capacity. The strong protecting the weak, as she had protected the lost brood of duckling with her foreleg on the night of Major's speech. Instead, she did not know why, they had come to a time when no one dared speak his mind, when fierce growling dogs roamed everywhere, and when you had to watch your comrades torn to pieces after confessing to shocking crimes. There was no thought of rebellion, of disobedience in her mind. She knew that, even as things were, they were far better off than they had been in the days of Jones, and that before all else, it was needful to prevent the return of human beings. Whatever happened, she would remain faithful, work hard, carry out the orders that were given to her, and accept the leadership of Napoleon. But still, it was not for this that she and all other animals had hoped and toiled. It was not for this that they had built a windmill and faced the bullets of John's guns. Such were her thoughts, though she lacked the words to express them. At last, feeling this to be in some way a substitute for the words she was unable to find, she began to sing Beasts of England. The other animals sitting around her took it up, and they sang it 3 times over, very tunefully, but slowly and mournfully, as in a way they had never sung it before. They had just finished singing it for the third time when Squealer, attended by two dogs, approached them with the air of having something important to say. He announced that, by a special decree of Comrade Napoleon, beasts of England had been abolished. From now onwards, it was forbidden to sing it. The animals were taken aback. "Why?" cried Muriel. "It's no longer needed, comrade," said Squealer stiffly. "Beasts of England were the son of the rebellion, but the rebellion is now completed. The execution of the traitors this afternoon was the final act. The enemy, both external and internal, has been defeated. In Beasts of England, we expressed our longing for a better society in days to come. But that society has now been established. Clearly, this song has no longer any purpose." Frightened though they were, some of the animals might possibly have protested. But at this moment, the sheep set up their usual bleating of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, which went on for several minutes and put an end to the discussion. So, Beast of England was heard no more. In its place, Minimus, the poet, had composed another song which began, Animal Farm, Animal Farm, never through me shall thou come to harm. And this was sung every Sunday morning after the hoisting of the flag. But somehow, neither the words nor the tune ever seemed to the animals to come up to Beasts of England. This is the end of the chapter 7. Well, this is a shocking chapter, to be honest. And there is a lot of things to think through. This, well, for the for previous two chapters, I barely found a couple of paragraphs to write the notes with, right? So they are laughably small because mostly what happened are just description of some events which were not remarkable by themselves, but rather descriptive about the situation. And now so many things have happened, and the last thing, the thoughts that were not voiced but thought through by Clover and described by author himself. This is a lot of material to think through because, well, this is a perfect conclusion and summary for the idea of the animal rebellion and what happened to the results of the rebellion itself. And the fact that they returned to the singing of Beasts of England, which was not just a song of rebellion, it was a song of the aspirations for a brighter, better future for animals and for those of them who will come after the current generation. And now it was the last thing that held them together, even in such difficult times. And now they lost it too, because obviously this song was a song of union. And when I was reading this, I thought, well, Napoleon is wrong here, because if they were to remain the farm with animals who are brainwashed to some sort to the commandments of animalism, this is the perfect tool for that. But apparently, even though many animals were unable to be deep thinkers, they actually see the situation and what what's happening here. And they able to grasp that this is not the future they were fighting for, and the text of Beasts of England, when they aspire for better future and for prosperity for all animals alike. Of course, the contrast between their reality and the thing that they sang in Beasts of England, and with their own memories of what was during the first days, even months of Animal Farm, they they would be able to compare all of that and came to and come to the conclusion that Napoleon has to go, and therefore Napoleon abolishes it, right? Or maybe it's not a Napoleon, maybe Squealer took it for himself, but probably not. Probably Napoleon. Probably Napoleon. So this is a very hard chapter, very heavy with events, with some thoughts that it produces, and well, I guess I'll see you sometime soon. And for today, we are going to wrap this up, and yep, bye bye.